Hey everyone, I'm Chris, horror filmmaker and fanatic, here to explain to you what makes something so scary. Today we're talking about Gerald's Game, released in 2017 on Netflix, directed by Mike Flanagan. He's a classic horror guy nowadays. Because it's a Netflix movie, we don't know the box office or budget, but we know Rotten Tomatoes, which is 91% score and 70% score for the audience. So a tiny bit of a divide, but still good overall. Today we're going to do a non-spoiler discussion going over the surface level fear and scares of Gerald's Game. Gerald's Game for me, first time I ever watched it was just a few days ago. I had heard about the film and I like Mike Flanagan, but I hadn't actually ever watched the film until recently. So, without further ado, let's dive into Gerald's Game. Carla Gugino and Bruce Greenwood are a married couple who arrive at an isolated house for a holiday. When the husband dies of a sudden heart attack, his wife, left handcuffed to the bed without the key and with little hope of rescue, must find a way to survive, all the while battling her inner demons. First category, the thrills, all the exciting stuff. This movie, not very thrilling. It is definitely a little bit more low-key with the thrills. There are moments where things start becoming a little more intense and higher, the heart's pumping a bit. But for the most part, it's a very quiet, subdued, psychological film. There's a lot of scenes where it's mostly just characters talking and dialogue and, the main character's having weird visions going on because she's kind of just handcuffed to a bed and what else is she gonna do? And, it can't actually have a film about her trying to necessarily escape the entire time. So there are other things that start happening in the film when we start learning more about her through her mind, and that's where the film is mostly taking place. So it's not really thrilling. There's not a whole lot of hardcore, intense scenes of survival necessarily. It's mostly subdued. That being said, I do give it a little bit of points because there are some scenes that really pump the tension up and start getting your heart racing, particularly one scene, which is the main reason that a lot of these categories are going to get a boost, is because of one scene in particular later on in the movie that everyone who's seen the movie knows about it, and it kind of came a little bit out of nowhere. You kind of didn't expect it. So that scene is very thrilling and very intense and very well handled. So that's where I leave this film, right there with the thrills. Next up, grossness, all the disgusting stuff that your mom doesn't want to look at. This film, a little moderate on the gross stuff. I would say compared to the thrills, there's definitely a little bit more gross stuff in this film. Some of it isn't shown necessarily, but the idea of it is gross. And the same scene that is the main reason I gave some boost to thrills, it's pretty gross. It's actually way more gross than I was expecting the movie to go. This film overall is kind of just quiet, spooky, psychological. It doesn't feel like a hardcore, dark, messed up film, but that scene felt straight out of one of those films. It felt like a Saw scene a little bit. But aside from that, this film doesn't have many other gross stuff to it. I would just say that one scene alone is really what boosts it. It definitely got me when I was first watching, and I'm used to gross stuff. That scene got me a bit. Next category is shock value, all the disturbing content that you didn't expect the film to go. Gerald's Game was a little surprising. It actually had some shocking content to it because overall I didn't feel like the film was going to be, like I said in the previous categories, hardcore, messed up. It felt more like a introspective spiritual journey of this woman who's gone through a lot, and we learn what she's gone through, and now we're learning all about that while she's tied to this bed with this sort of ticking time bomb of all right, you're eventually going to starve to death, so you got to get out of here somehow. So even though the film is more cerebral and she's figuring herself out in a way, the shocking stuff comes in ways that you didn't expect. And just same with the thrills and grossness. I would say that a fair amount of the shocking content isn't shown, it's more implied, and it's not getting the camera up in it here's what's really happening. It's more very careful about it, and it's handled very well. But some of the topics that the film covers is actually pretty dark and pretty shocking. And of course, the scene that I keep talking about, it's shocking. It was everything. That was definitely the most horror scene of the movie. And then the final category, atmosphere, the tone and feel of the film. How well is it building up the fear with seemingly nothing? This film has really good atmosphere. The entire time you are just all right, I'm watching a horror movie. I know stuff's gonna go wrong soon. And then when things are going wrong with the ticking time bomb, we are in survival mode with her, oh God, you got to get out of this. But what I didn't expect the film to really start covering is sort of crazy mind games where you kind of are uh-oh, I feel like I'm kind of in a nightmare a bit, and it gets really psychological and kind of freaky at times, and that's really fun. There's also a certain figure in the film that a lot of people remember that is sort of like the scary figure, and that really builds up the horror as well, and it kind of gets you in that really scared mood, like, I don't know what's going on, I don't like this. And because this film is a lot of like just kind of characters talking, a lot of like one-on-one dialogue, this film does a great job of keeping that sort of mind-bending psychological horror in your head. Like, sure, like things aren't coming out at you, there's not necessarily a direct danger or scary thing there, but like the entire situation just itself, like when you hear the plot, like, oh, she's tied to her bed, how is she going to get out of this, is already like scary and intense on its own. But then with the inner demons coming into play, the mind stuff going on, there's a lot of different things that this film is covering, and it's pretty creepy. So now, overview of all the categories stacked up. As you can see, this film is moderately scary, you know, with all of the vials being filled up with the blood. You know, everyone finds different things scary. I would say atmosphere is the best part of this movie, definitely the thing that carries it. In terms of fear, in terms of the movie itself, I would say that the acting is phenomenal by the main actress, Carla Gugino. She did fantastic, because this is like her film basically. And I was also just really impressed that for a film that's very small scale, mostly just one person in a room that can't move, it held my attention the entire time, and also delved into deeper topics aside from things that are like survival. Like there's also like sort of like history and trauma and other things that were really well done. And by the end, I wouldn't say I was necessarily really scared for the most part. There was a part of the film that was like kind of scary, and I really liked the one scene that I keep talking about. But what I really enjoyed was just the introspective nature of the film, and a character exploring their inner demons through some pretty trippy stuff that I think a lot of us can relate to. And it feels like a learning experience, where it's like, oh, I feel like I learned something about that. And also, it's a story that's pretty straightforward. I think, you know, there are other horror films like Hereditary or The Shining that the stories are kind of less accessible and more in the background. You kind of have to do research afterwards to really figure out what was going on. Gerald's Game has a nice balance. It's not all in your face, like, oh, I know where this film is headed, but it's pretty balanced. And I think everyone can find different things to enjoy about this film. But yeah, overall, Gerald's Game's solid. So recommendations, I would say anyone who's looking for horror can enjoy Gerald's Game. Not only will horror buffs enjoy it and regular kind of horror people, but even horror newbies. I think this film isn't too scary to where it's gonna, you know, traumatize you or whatever, but I think anyone who's looking for just a solid, you know, nice horror movie, I think Gerald's Game is a solid pick. That being said, the triggering topics covered in the film, which I'm gonna give a minor spoiler just because it is a sensitive topic, in terms of child abuse and sexual abuse, if those are topics that really get to you, this film goes over that. So if that's something that is really sensitive to you, be prepared for that, because you don't expect the film to go there necessarily right away. The film mostly made me uncomfortable with some of the topics that it covers, and ironically, those topics aren't shoved in your face, but just going over it, and you know, I've already learned to care about the characters, like it gets me feeling a little shaky. Or like, ugh. So there you go, Gerald's Game, fantastic horror movie. You can check out the link in the description to rent it in case you don't have Netflix, but also it's on Netflix, so if you have that, you can just watch it anytime. I'm also uploading a spoiler talk of this film, so if you've already seen it and you want to hear my real in-depth analysis of this film, check out the link right here, and comment below any other horror movies that you'd like me to go over. Subscribe for more, and that is it for this video. Thank you for watching.